And hopefully, there we go. We're live. Cool. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchioni here with you with a special guest this morning. So this fresh young face here to my left is Austin Randolph, and Austin is our summer intern, sales intern, working with Zach Bennis. So you lucked out. We put you with a good guy on the team. We try to pick a good mentor for the intern every year, and this year it got to be Zach that has the responsibility of keeping young Austin busy and productive and learning and doing something more valuable than just pounding signposts all summer. Lots of seed interns get to put in lots of signposts, and never thought that was a particularly good learning experience for a college educated individual. But anyway, so Austin's been here with us for the summer, and we're going to get to know him a little bit as we go here. We're going to talk about fungicides. We're going to talk about insects. We're going to talk a little bit about weeds and herbicide applications. I got Adam with us here today. He's doing a little homework assignment now. We're trying to compare some different rainfall totals and climate on some different farms. So he's looking up a farm in his territory, which he will be the winner, I think, of the most moisture of the three farms we're going to look at. And then I got one from Logan County in Chris Bachman's territory, and I've got my home farm at London Mills. Rainfall totals have been all over the board. Generally speaking, prior to a few days ago, east of the Illinois River had been pretty dry, and those guys were concerned about how they were going to fare going through pollination here. With the remnants of the hurricane, plus some other fronts going through, the east side of the river has picked up some good moisture. I think, Austin, you told me that Zach's area picked up a couple inches.
Yep, right around 2 inches.
The day the hurricane went through. And speaking of that, do either of you know what's the proper pronunciation? It's not burl, right? How are they saying that? Barrel. Okay. Mm-hmm. Reminds me of Burl Ives. Yeah. I told Bachman that, and he laughed at that. But I think Burl Ives was spelled B-U-R-L, which is a hell of a lot easier to say than barrel, the hurricane. But anyway, thankful for that moisture. Now, I think the eastern side of Illinois got too much of a good thing. There's certainly parts of north of my area that have had more than they need. I was talking to a producer the other day that shall remain nameless, because those of you who haven't gotten enough rain do not want to hear some guy whining about his yellow areas in his soybean fields where the saturated soils are starting to damage his crop because it's too wet. I traveled to Memphis, Missouri, couple nights ago on 136 going across western Illinois into Missouri. That's certainly a wet spot over there. It's like Adam's got his total 5.7. Okay, so we went on three different farms. We went since June 22nd. So if you look at your rainfall history in climate, and we've explained how to get there before, it's a bit of a process, but in your climate account, every field that you have in there, you can look up historical weather data on. And actually, just a little bit of a reminder, those totals that are in there are going to be slightly different than what you get on your phone every day when you get your text of how much rain you got. Because what they do is what the 24-hour total that you get on your phone is the best information we can get to you quickly. What gets posted on climate.com online is after 72 hours of accumulating actual rainfall data from weather stations and extrapolating that data and trying to refine that data and improve that data. They post a more accurate figure on climate.com. So that 72-hour total figure for a day is actually the official rainfall for that day. The 24-hour total that you get on your phone is a quick best guess estimate. So if you compare the two, you will notice they're different. And so sometimes when people complain that they don't think what they got on their phone was very accurate, I like to tease them. They're comparing that to somebody's rain gauge, which is also not accurate. So when you're comparing two inaccurate things, take your best guess of which one's closer to right. But anyway, So we picked a field in Adams territory, one in Logan County and mine at Fulton County. Since June 22nd at my house, I've had a little over 4 inches. The field in Logan County has had 3 point, no, 4, let's see, 4.3 inches. So again, a little over 4 inches. And then Adams field had 5.7. So that's, those are all good rainfall amounts for that time of year. Nothing excessive there. There's places, you've probably heard reports of, Minnesota and Wisconsin and parts of the Dakotas, just horrible flooding up there. One of my daughters is spending the summer in Fenimore, Wisconsin, doing a internship for Select Sires, and she's in that wet band up there. They've had 10 inches plus just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it had already been raining a lot before that. So lots of places experiencing too much rain, few little pockets where it'd be nice to get some more. Most of us are in pretty good shape. And I think, you all get frustrated sometimes when you're getting too much rain, and that old marketing adage that rain makes grain seems to be driving the markets down, in spite of the fact that we are suffering from too much rain in some areas. One thing that agronomically you do need to keep in mind, and I'm not sticking up for the markets here, but you do need to recognize that for every acre that gets ruined by too much rain, there's probably 3 acres that are going to do better because of that too much rain. So for that reason, that old adage of rain makes grain, even when you're getting too much rain, that rain is still making grain. So, we lose more yield year in and year out from being too dry than we do being too wet. So there is, unfortunately, for those that are trying to wish the markets back up, there's probably not enough acres getting destroyed by hail, and probably not enough acres getting destroyed by flood to offset the acres that are benefiting, like ours are from these good rains. So we're a long ways away from being done. You can find corn. I drove past some today on the way here to Macomb. That's probably R3. Adam, you've probably got lots of R3 corn, I would guess, like roasting ear stage, maybe even getting close to dent, or not dent, but dough stage. So some big full-size ears that you can actually count kernels on, and those kernels are going to be there. Now, we don't yet know how big those kernels are going to be, but once an ear gets to that stage, it can't shed kernels. I had a guy sending me yield checks a couple days ago on corn that was, barely blister. And, that's a little early to be doing yield checks because we don't know how many of those kernels might abort. Now, he was coming up with some hellish good checks that made him feel good. And I hope he gets there. But, some of them were starting with a 3. So he was pretty optimistic on the prospects for his crop. And I would say, just in general, the color, the health, the moisture, there's a lot of things going for us right now from a standpoint of yield. Now, looking at the prices, we're all going to want to have a lot of bushels to come up with the dollars that we're going to be looking for. And like I say, we're a long ways from done. This mid-May planted corn, which most of my corn at home went in that mid-May window. I'm a couple weeks from tassel yet on that stuff, for at least 10 days. So, it hasn't pollinated yet, hasn't really accomplished anything yet. Still plenty of time for it to get too dry. Still plenty of time for it to get too hot. Who knows? This little bit of heat we got coming this week, not a big deal. People look for, we're in that time of year where people are looking for reasons why the market should be going up, because, being 93 for 2 days in central Illinois in July is not going to get the market excited. That's what we call normal weather there. So that's not a big deal. And fortunately for yield, unfortunately for price, we're in a pretty good moisture situation. So to me, it's probably most likely going to be disease that will derail this crop. If anything's going to derail this crop, we got plenty of time for tar spot to get bad. We got plenty of time for southern rust to get bad. I drove through fog soup this morning on my way to Macomb. Everything is wet, dripping. This is perfect weather conditions for disease development right now. So we know there's a little tar spot around. We know there's going to be spores that are infecting. How bad it's going to get, we don't know. But my gut feeling is, with the moisture we've got, the weather conditions we've got, if it doesn't get, you know, pretty bad at some point this summer, I'll be a little bit surprised by that. I don't know if we're looking for a repeat of 21 or not, but I would certainly expect more tar spot than we've seen in 22 or 23, based on how early we found it and based on the weather conditions that we've had. Now, we're still learning about this disease. It surprises us all the time. And if it turns out to be a big old nothing burger this summer, I think that will surprise a lot of people that think they understand how tar spot works. So we'll see where that ends up. But I know it's hard to be super excited about spending $50 an acre on a good fungicide, application and product, and some adjuvants and maybe some insecticide with sub $4 corn. But I do think that does have a high likelihood of giving you a positive ROI. Now, it'd be a hell of a lot more positive at $6 corn than it's going to be at $3.90 corn. We all know that. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So I guess I'm a little bit fearful that 21 was our last bad disease year. A lot of producers at the end of 21 wish they'd have been more aggressive with fungicide. A lot of people have been more aggressive with fungicide in 22 and 23. Murphy's Law being in effect always. 22 and 23 were 2 years you probably could have skimped on fungicide and it wouldn't hurt you too bad. I'm not sure 24 is that year, but if you've been, in your mind, overdoing it the last 2 years, and this feels like a good year to pull back because of commodity prices and because you haven't felt you've saw the benefit the last 2 years, again, we're a broken record saying this, but every year is different. This year has really no similarity to 22 or 23. Feels more like 21 to me than 22 or 23. And 21 was a year where we had lots of crown rot, lots of southern rust, lots of tar spot. And it was really, really, really difficult to not make good money spraying fungicide in 21. So, question in the chat, Adam?
Yeah. So, every territory is different as far as our team is concerned. And my territory was pretty lucky. We got a lot of stuff planted early.
Right.
We didn't get everything planted early.
Right.
So we've got this division of kind of two main planting windows.
Mm-hmm.
Grant brought up a great question here that I've had conversations with a lot of my growers, and I'm sure you've been having the same conversations about whether or not there's more concern or less concern for the later planted corn when it comes to disease.
Yeah. So great question. The answer to the question, the smart ass answer, is yes. And the reason I say that is because there's some diseases, crown rot in particular, that I'm very concerned about on the early planted corn. Anything that went in before that really wet April weekend that kind of started, we were in a dry spring until the 26th of April. I remember that date because that's my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. So it rained on my mom's birthday on the 26th. It rained all that weekend, and a lot of us picked up 3 or 4 inches of cold rain that weekend in April. And then it stayed wet off and on. We had little planting windows. Adam's territory was probably 80% of your corn was planted by then, I would guess. But there were places that nothing had been planted at that time. So we do have a huge range in planting dates. I mean, Adam had guys rolling in March on corn and beans. Almost everybody was going in early April in his territory. Other places, people were more patient. And if you were very patient, if you were looking for a good temperature, a good forecast, and good soil conditions, you kind of didn't have that until about the middle of May in some places. So we've got a lot of small planting windows. Not everybody had the same planting windows, but to answer Grant's good question. So on the early planted corn, I think it is really set up to have a lot of crown rot infection in it. Now, if we keep getting moisture, crown rot is really only a big deal when you have infection early, which we did, I guarantee it, with the weather conditions we had. And then you have to have stress during grain fill. If you get through grain fill with no stress, which we are right now in a 0 stress grain fill, crown rot generally is not too bad. So that might help that stuff that I think is set up for pretty severe crown rot avoid pretty severe crown rot if it doesn't get enough stress. Now, I think tar spot and southern rust could be a far bigger deal on the later planted corn. Now, you're going to find it first in the old corn. Tar spot needs, you don't find tar spot in small corn. You find tar spot generally in full grown corn. It needs a full, dense canopy. It likes dark conditions. It likes low light conditions. It likes moist, damp conditions. It likes it a little bit cooler. That's the lower canopy in a fully grown, corn canopy. And so you generally are going to find tar spot first in the oldest corn. But it's going to develop over time based on growing conditions and based on, the environment and such. And if the corn is far enough ahead before the tar spot gets bad, you're going to be able to see it. There's going to be a lot on the plant at harvest. But if it didn't really get bad on the plant until the dent stage, it's not going to hurt yield much. It's going to be a conversation piece. You're going to be nervous about it because in the fall, every leaf's going to be covered with tar spot. You're going to think, oh man, wonder how good this could have been if all this tar spot wasn't there. But generally, that's kind of what's normal for us with tar spot. It comes in late enough, it doesn't hurt too bad. Now, if you plant late and by, let's say, August 1st, tar spot is bad, August 1st, this mid-May planted corn will be barely pollinated. Adams corn will be about 2 weeks from black layer on August 1st. So if you've got two plants that have the same amount of tar spot on them, the one that's 2 weeks from black layer isn't going to get hurt near as bad as the one that's, just pollinated. So that's why I think for the two foliar diseases that we worry the most about, which for me, southern rust and tar spot, I'm more nervous about the later planted corn. Now, if the primary disease problem we have this year is crown rot, I think that late planted corn will be healthier than the early planted corn. If the primary disease problem we have this year is tar spot or southern rust, then I think the early planted corn, it may have as much disease on it, but it's going to get that disease in it at a more mature stage of growth. And the diseases do more damage if they get into the crop at a earlier stage of growth. So I'm concerned about diseases in both crops or in all planting dates. We've had perfect weather for disease. Now, we didn't have that in 22, and we didn't have a lot of disease. We didn't have that in 23, and we didn't have a lot of disease outside of some pockets that had some pretty severe crown rot in 23. We didn't have the foliar diseases that we dealt with in 21. But that was primarily because of record dry May and June weather conditions. This year, we had some areas that were dry in June, but it was following a wet May. Lots of places this year were never dry in May or June. So it's been a lot different than what 22 and 23 was. And in 22 and 23, we kind of blamed the summer flash drought, or maybe gave credit to, would be a better way of saying it, for the reason we didn't have tar spot. If that's the reason we didn't have tar spot, then we ought to have a lot of tar spot this year because we've had plenty of moisture. And, we found it early. And typically when you find it early, it's got plenty of time to get bad. I'm a little surprised, frankly, that in the last 3 weeks, it hasn't seemingly progressed a lot. Now, it could be progressing and we'd never know it because the latent period on tar spot infection is pretty long. That means it takes, I think it's 2 to 3 weeks is generally what's considered to be the latency period between infection and when you can actually see with your eye a lesion on a leaf. So by the time you start to see lesions on the leaf, there's about 3 weeks worth of infection that has occurred that you can't see yet. And that's part of the reason why it kind of like poof overnight. It's like, wow, where'd all that come from? Well, it's been building unbeknownst to you. but it's just now getting to the point where you can see it. And that is one of the biggest reasons why I am not a fan of these, well, let's wait till I can find some disease before I put my fungicide on recommendation. This crop is so healthy, it doesn't need fungicide now. It's going to need fungicide a month from now. And I don't want to spray too early and lose out on late season protection. So I'm going to drag my feet until brown silk or later. And then, it takes 10 days for the field to get sprayed after I turn it in. And all of a sudden I'm spraying sweet corn, roasting year, stage corn with the first application of fungicide. That's actually the perfect timing for your second post-tassel application of fungicide if you want to be super aggressive. So the analogy I use this almost every day with somebody, it's just like spraying weeds. And I think over the last couple of years, I think more and more people are figuring out that let's wait and make sure they're all up. Let's not get in a big hurry. Let's make sure we're getting them all sprayed. We can kill that big weed. Bad idea. We need to spray weeds early. We need to spray weeds small. We need to spray fungicide early before the disease gets the crop infected. Both weed control and disease control work best as a preventative rather than as a rescue type application. So if that analogy helps you pull the trigger on a fungicide, then get to pulling, because there's lots of acres of corn in the state that should have already been sprayed with fungicide. Now, we've had trouble with weather. I was talking to a friend of mine. He does a lot with high boy, and it's been too wet to be in a lot of fields. And then if you're spraying even by air, you can't spray in the rain. You don't particularly want it to rain 30 minutes after you leave the field. So you want to be frustrated about spending $50. Well, get it washed off with the rain too fast after you put it on. That's frustrating. So I get it. It's hard to make those applications. And the guy I was talking to yesterday that's trying to spray with a high boy, he says, the last year I had a hard time getting fungicide on because of weather was 21. And that just kind of made him think, okay, well, this is a disease loving environment that we're having. And the irony of that is, in a disease loving environment, that means the weather might make it difficult for you to get your fungicide on. So another reason to not dilly-dally around and pass up good spray days because you've got some strategy from somebody that said you might want to wait. So looks like a question came in there, Adam. I'll let you study that all. Well, let's introduce Austin here real quick, because Jennifer's going to be screaming at me if we're at an hour and poor Austin hasn't got to say a damn word yet. So we're going to kind of mix this up a little bit. So Austin, once you start talking, people are going to find out you're from the South. Mm-hmm. And you were explaining the other day, you even sound pretty Southern for a Kentucky boy.
I do.
So I'll let you explain maybe why that is, if you've got any theories behind that. And Austin, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. I appreciate Lance and everyone for having me on this morning. But as he said, my name's Austin Randolph. I'm the summer intern here for the Western Illinois Business Unit, primarily focusing on DeKalb Asgrow, working primarily with Zach Bennis, as Lance shared as well. A little bit about me. I'm from Western Kentucky, a little town by the name of Bremen, Kentucky. And I'll be going into my senior year of ag business at Murray State University. And Lance kind of hinted at why I might sound a little more Southern than your typical Kentuckian. And a lot of that has to do with where I did go to school. So I've kind of picked up the more Southern accent. Murray State lies right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border in Callaway County, Kentucky. About an hour south of the Illinois line as well. So kind of in that narrow part of the state. So I get the best of both worlds, seeing my folks from the South, and we also get a pretty good Southern Illinois crowd there at Murray State.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to learning more about Murray State, and our viewers can too. Now we have some connections to Murray State here at Bear. So there's a few people that work here that are Murray State grads, and we've actually found Murray State's a pretty sweet spot to recruit interns out of. So we've actually been somewhat inundated with interns from Murray State. And I didn't know that much about Murray State, and I think the name itself is a little bit interesting. I mean, Murray's the town,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Murray's not a state.
No.
Is that like a slap to UK that's Murray State, or what is that?
There's always been a little friendly rivalry especially between the ag schools of who's better, and in my opinion, over the last few years, Murray State might have that little leg up in some areas. So,
well, we've had some damn good interns from there. Sometimes you go to schools and you bring in kids that, so that's what corn looks like. And we've gotten some good ag interns out of Murray State, and I've enjoyed getting to know several of them here the last few years. So tell us a little bit about what's the undergrad enrollment at Murray?
So undergrad enrollment at Murray State is right around 8,000.
Okay.
And I know the last 2 years, including this year, we've had our 2 largest freshman classes enrolled.
Okay.
So that number's continuing to go up every year, with the ag enrollment being about a fifth of that. So the ag school does have a pretty big pool there at Murray State. One thing that always attracted me towards Murray State was just that smaller class size. The faculty to student ratio is phenomenal, especially within the school ag, which really gives you that hands-on experience, that opportunity to develop good relationship with your professors, in addition to our different farm facilities that allow folks like me who didn't have a ton of agronomic experience going into college, the opportunity to go out there, work on the farm, and get to learn by doing.
So what's your family do for your folks, or they're not farmers?
No, sir. So I actually come from a non-traditional ag background. I kind of got my introduction into the ag industry through FFA. Both of my parents now work kind of in the healthcare sector.
Okay.
So they always encouraged me to go into the ag sector or the ag industry, just because my dad had some ties to it. Very similar path as me in high school, did the whole FFA route. I really found a love for the industry and actually worked in industry for a few years after school. So that's kind of been my segue. I've been fortunate enough to have some great mentors along the way who've kind of taken me under their wing and really exposed me to this ag input sector of the industry. So I've definitely found a love for it over the course of my past few years and different internship experiences. Yeah.
Well, you're certainly you certainly got a lot of good exposure within Bear, because you were with us last summer as well, right? So what'd you do last summer?
Yeah. So last summer, I was up in South Dakota, more specifically East Central South Dakota, kind of managed that little area, working on the crop protection side. So definitely a different experience, but I've definitely been able to find some similarities between the two. As far as geographically, South Dakota definitely has some differences, while it also has some similarities. Weed pressure is about the same up there. We've had a lot of the same conversations this summer regarding weed management as we did last summer, but I guess if you exclude this year, you're typically looking at a much drier growing season. Right. So that disease conversation isn't necessarily as prominent, up around that territory. And oddly enough, my project was working on a fungicide program, so I was really fortunate to get to have a lot of interesting conversations and encourage growers to go out there and maybe say, hey, you might not have a lot of disease pressure, but looking from a plant health standpoint, this fungicide is going to pay for itself. So got to have a lot of neat experiences relating to that. And it's been awesome to get to see, different areas of the country, whether that be South Dakota or Western Illinois, after growing up in Kentucky and kind of experiencing agriculture in that neck of the woods.
So what would you say, what are the primary crops of Kentucky? I know that it's more diverse than Illinois is. Yeah. So you guys have got more stuff. Lot different landscape, lot different, farms.
Definitely.
But what would be like the top 5 crops in Kentucky?
Definitely, yeah. Kentucky, I will add this before I kind of dive into the crops. As you go from west to east in the state, is diverse within itself, just in the landscape and what the growing season looks like. But I would say the top 5 crops, if you look at Kentucky as a whole, are definitely corn, soybeans are our 2 primary. Tobacco, which back 20 years ago, this would be a very different conversation. I would probably put that at the top of the list. But just as times have changed, tobacco is definitely taking less of a role, but it's definitely still something we take a lot of pride in Kentucky. And I would definitely say wheat has become more and more of a crop that people are utilizing as the promotion of cover crops. within the state continues to grow. And then I would say, number 5 would probably be a toss up between. We've seen a lot of guys trying out canola as a winter cover crop. Sure enough, industrial rapeseed being a very similar crop to canola. But yeah, we see more and more of that every year. Just people trying to diversify their operation, and go for those premiums that are associated with some of those crops.
And you were telling me tobacco production, hasn't changed a lot.
No,
over the decades, still very labor intensive, right?
Absolutely.
You mentioned, I never even thought about this. It's even dangerous when you're putting it up in the top of the barn for dry, because you're still drying it the way they did, during Civil War.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's interesting, and it's a neat. I'm not a tobacco user. I'm not even particularly a fan of the fact that there is tobacco, to be honest with you, but I think it's a cool crop, and it is interesting to drive through Kentucky and you see something. Well, what's that? That looks a little different. Well, it's a tobacco field.
Absolutely, it's definitely a crop that provides its own unique challenges, and like you said, there's a lot of heritage involved with it. It hasn't changed a whole lot over the years, and the people that are still able to continue to raise it are definitely just as proud to do so as they were, 15, 20 years ago.
Well, cool. All right. So what's been your primary focus this summer working with us?
Yeah. So my primary focus this summer, we've got an intern project that we work on all summer, and I've definitely been a large fan of what I've been able to do this summer. So the overarching theme of my project has of course been, what can we as Bayer do to best service our customers? I've had a lot of conversations. I've figured out what's working right now, what maybe needs a little improvement. And two areas that I've really been able to focus in on have been NCGA enrollment and, our Yield Chasers contest. 2 contests that pair pretty well together. From what I've seen, they're 2 great opportunities for us at Bayer to have that touch point with that grower, have those conversations that, without these programs, we may not necessarily be having. They're definitely 2 programs that are able to, instill confidence and maintain confidence in the grower, in that crop throughout the growing season, just because of that competitive edge that they all have.
Right. They all do like to compete and like to celebrate good yield.
Absolutely.
So let's dive back into the chat here. Looks like we've had some questions coming in, Adam. So we'll take a few of these and then we'll come back to Austin.
Yeah. So I had a couple questions from Parker and Tom. We'll start with Parker because that's kind of where we left off. It has to do with fungicide. He's wondering, he's at Brown Silk, doesn't have a lot of gray leaf spot showing, not much or any noticeable tar spot, he says. And you kind of touched on this already, Lance, but just to reinforce it, I mean, do you still see a fungicide providing much positive return on investment? He mentions in there he's not a customer of ours, not that matters. He was curious if it does, I guess. And he's located over in East Central Illinois. So
okay. Well, so that that area, and in some places in Eastern Illinois, it had been pretty dry for a period of time, and other places it's been wet all year. So it depends a little bit maybe on that environment that you've been in, whether you've been wet and still not seeing any disease, or have you been dry and maybe that's why you're not seeing disease. First and foremost, you can absolutely still get a benefit from a fungicide at any stage of growth. Now, your odds of getting a positive plant health response are best in that VT to R1 window. Your odds of getting, out there in time to stop early tar spot are best in that VT to R1 window. If you're already at brown silk, that's, R2 or later. There could be more tar spot infection in that crop than you realize, just because you can't see the lesions yet, but it's already infected. So I still think with the weather conditions that we're having presently, I still think it would be worth protecting that crop with a fungicide, even if you are a little bit later than I would have, recommended making the application. But the frustrating thing about, spending money on fungicides is we won't know until after you do it. And there's just no way to know before you do it whether you need to or not. And that's, just an unfortunate reality. There's people that there's people sensing for disease spores, in the air, and trying to track, am I finding the disease spores as a way to spray? There's people that like to scout the crop. There's people that like to watch the weather. There's people that like to watch the markets. There's all these different ways that people like to use to help them make the decision whether they're going to do it or not. None of those things are foolproof. None of those things are guaranteed. And there's really no way to know when you make the decision to make that application, am I going to break even? Am I going to double my money? Am I going to triple my money? Is this a year when I should have kept my money in my pocket? We just don't know. Now, the data, in my opinion, pretty strongly supports if you just do a good fungicide application at the right time on every acre every year, it will make you money. Where I worry that, and maybe your luck is better than mine. I know in my life, if I start second guessing when I should be doing things, I'm going to do it in all the years when I could have got by without it. And I'm going to not do it in the years when I should have. That's just the way things happen. So if you miss out on that 30 bushel response that would have paid for 2 years worth of fungicide, that impacts your long-term ROI. So I just don't think that people, would be hurt economically by just prepaying it, making it part of your standard program and do it. But that doesn't mean it pays on every acre every year. That means it pays over the long haul. There's different ways to look at, does it pay? There's more to it than just a yield increase. Some guys see tremendous amount of value in harvestability. And it does make a big difference in, and I know guys that, they try to spray all the acres that they think they're going to harvest late. And maybe they don't spray some of the stuff they're going to harvest early. So there's different strategies out there, but, from yield standpoint, protecting your crop, harvestability, there's lots of possible benefits. The other thing we haven't talked about here today that I think is a huge thing this year is insect pressure. And I think there's fields out there that will benefit as much from the insecticide as they do from the fungicide in some cases. So not only do we have diseases to protect the crop from, we have insects to protect the crop from. And I've gotten pictures of plants covered in aphids. I've gotten pictures of plants, eaten by Japanese beetles. We've talked a lot about stink bugs, which, that was more of an early season problem, but they're still there in the soybeans, feeding on pods. They're going to be feeding on ears of corn, sucking sap out of kernels. The stink bugs are going to be here through the whole growing season. Seems like I'm missing something. Corn rootworm beetle adults. A lot of people, I was talking to a guy that's spraying with a high boy. They're crawling all over the windshield of his high boy. He was just shocked at how many corn rootworm beetles he was seeing. So this is started with alfalfa weevil, and cutworm. This has been a bad bug year. It's the year of the cicada as well. So luckily cicadas are not really crop pests. They're just annoying. And, buffalo gnats, ticks, take your pick. It's a buggy year. So I also like to recommend, if you're out there with a fungicide, put some insecticide in with it. And if you're out there with an insecticide, put some fungicide in with it. Works both ways. And, there's lots of reasons to consider both in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's a perfect segue, Lance. Tom Kennel, he had a question right on par with what you're talking about. It says Bayer sending out some insect alerts for most of Illinois for high pressure rootworm alerts, and he wants to know if you've been seeing those higher pressures or not.
Yeah, I've certainly seen a lot of beetles. Now a lot of beetles does not necessarily mean a lot of feeding, because most of the beetles that most people have been seeing and trapping are northerns. We're seeing some westerns as well. There's always a mix, but it seems like it used to be we had mostly westerns with some northerns. The last couple of years, it's been a lot of northerns with a few westerns. Northern adults will lay eggs in grassy areas as well. So westerns primarily are going to lay their eggs either in a cornfield or a bean field. A northern adult likes to lay eggs in grassy areas. And so I've had fields the last couple of years where there was an alarming number of northern adult rootworm beetles in fields. And you would maybe be concerned that, well, guys, did they lay their eggs in this field when it was in soybeans last year? Northerns have not been known to lay eggs in soybean fields. Doesn't mean they don't occasionally, but they're not really known for that. But the beetles themselves are pretty mobile. So don't assume that every beetle you see in your cornfield hatched from an egg and became a larva in that cornfield. It could come from a pasture across the road. It could come from the road ditch. It could come from a field lane. It could come from any grassy area if it's a northern corn rootworm, because they will lay their eggs in those grassy areas. So to know, did that rootworm beetle, if it was a larva in that field, you're probably going to have some root feeding if you've got enough of them crawling around that it's alarming to you. So we need to dig roots. We need to wash roots. Nobody has. I did find this was in a field of first year corn in McDonough County, along a field edge. I did find, it wouldn't have rated. It was feeding scars and pruning. It would not have rated very high on a 0 to 3 node injury scale. Maybe a 0.1, 0.2 at most. But it was quite a bit of feeding, considering we were in first year corn in McDonough County. But we went out into the interior of the field, didn't find any at all. So the only place we were finding it was along the field edges. So I think it was probably primarily maybe some northerns that had been, working in the road ditch along the edge of the field and maybe laid a few eggs out into the field. One thing that my colleague Jim Donnelly has observed in Northern Illinois is just polluted with rootworm. And, Tom, you're a little further north than a lot of people that are listening here. And the closer you get to Northern Illinois, the heavier your rootworm pressure is going to be, and the more likely you are to run into issues. Corn on corn, always potential rootworm. Pumpkin ground, always. We use pumpkins as a trap crop for rootworm beetles when we're doing research, and we want high populations. They love the adult beetles are just super attracted to pumpkin fields. And so there's always a lot of egg laying that goes on in pumpkin fields. So a lot of times corn following pumpkins, that actually has heavier rootworm pressure than corn on corn does. But you go to Northern Illinois has such a high population of rootworm, like we did around here 10 or 15 years ago. Probably, well, actually worse than, at our worst 10 or 15 years ago, they would love to have that lower rootworm pressure in Northern Illinois. I mean, they're off the charts. And so Jim finds rootworm places that he wouldn't expect to find rootworm. They've never had a huge first year variant problem in Northern Illinois, but they've got quite a bit of rootworm in first year corn up there because they're everywhere. They're looking for some place to hang out where there's not already 1,000 other rootworms beetles there. So you find rootworm beetles all over the place in Northern Illinois. They find them in all rotations. I think they're like water hemp in Northern Illinois. There's just a lot of them. So we're fortunate we don't have that high a population, but it does seem like the population is increasing. And Tom, you commented on the stuff that Bear's sending out. We're doing that because we do beetle trapping every summer, and we're trying to get more people to do beetle trapping. I'm trying to get more people to trap in soybean fields. A lot of our trap data comes in cornfields. I've never been a fan of putting a trap out in a cornfield. I don't know what purpose that serves really, but a lot of our trap data is coming from cornfields. Rootworm beetles are attracted to corn pollen. Rootworm beetles, no matter where the rootworm larvae was, when they emerge as an adult, they're going to go to a cornfield. Even the first year variant that lays eggs in soybean fields would rather be in a cornfield than it would be in a soybean field. And the years where first year variant gets really bad is when the corn is drought stressed and burned up and full of disease, and the cornfields just don't look good. So as you're a beetle flying around looking for a place to lay your eggs, late in the summer, bean fields usually look a lot darker green, look a lot healthier, look a lot lusher than a half dead cornfield's going to. And so that's one of the theories as to why they started laying their eggs in soybean fields. They're trying to, rear their young in an environment that looks hospitable. And a half dead, burned up cornfield does not look very hospitable versus a nice, pretty green bean field. So we have seen in trap counts, the areas that have heavy pressure have been expanding. We haven't had a lot of incidents yet of finding feeding in non-rootworm protected corn in first year corn. I don't know when we're going to, if there's going to be a tipping point occur when we do go back to where we're worried about rootworm on every acre in central Illinois. It's nice not to have to worry about rootworm on every acre in central Illinois. And a lot of our growers, haven't planted rootworm resistant corn for years. We've had a lot of success with non-rootworm corn on rotated acres. And so I hope we can continue to raise non-rootworm corn on rotated acres. But certainly the corn on corn acre and as you go north in Illinois, where every acre is potentially a rootworm acre, we have to be careful with that. But we got to dig roots. You can't look at beetles and make any assessment of your roots. Digging roots sucks. Nobody likes to do it. If I did it more, I'd be in better shape. It's a good workout for you. And you got to soak them, you got to wash them. You can't just dig them and tell anything. You got to get all the soil out of your way so you can see what's going on. And if you need help with that, if you need somebody that has experience rating roots to look at your roots, get a hold of your dealer, get a hold of your local FSR, get a hold of me, get a hold of somebody, and we can get somebody out there to help you evaluate those roots. Not saying we're going to dig them all for you, but we'll help you evaluate them and see what kind of rootworm pressure you've got. The beetles came from a larvae somewhere. But if they're coming from larvae in corn on cornfields, and they're coming from larvae that were, come out of a pasture or a grassy roadside somewhere, that's not anything to be concerned about. That's just normal rootworm biology. But if we start finding, significant signs of root feeding on rotated acres, that would be a new development in recent years. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was kind of a common thing. 2015 happened. So 2015 is kind of the year that's credited with kind of resetting the scale. We had places had 30 inches of rain in June in 2015, and we drowned a lot of rootworm larvae. And at that same time, corn prices came down. We went back to rotation and we launched Smart Stacks. So we went to better rootworm technology, higher levels of protection. We went back to rotation, and Mother Nature helped us, by decimating that population with some really, really wet, saturated soils. Rootworm are not strong swimmers, can't hold their breath well. They don't like wet, saturated soils. I've had a lot of people say, hey, it's been pretty wet this year. Well, it hasn't been that wet this year. So I don't know that we drowned a lot of rootworm this year like we did in 2015. And based on the adult populations we're seeing, there obviously you can't, a dead larvae does not make a beetle. So every beetle that you see was once a larvae that was not drowned. So they survive pretty well, it seems like to me.
Yeah. Definitely been seeing mainly northerns from what people got to take a picture, or you can Google it as well if you don't know the difference between a western or a northern. Just Google it.
And westerns are easy to confuse with bean leaf beetles as well.
Yes.
And there's also a southern corn rootworm, which is a non-issue for us, but a lot of times you'll find those beetles late in the season. They don't overwinter here, so they can lay eggs all they want. They're not going to hurt a thing. So if it's a bean leaf beetle or a southern corn rootworm beetle, unless there's so many of them that the beetle themselves is doing damage, you don't need to worry about that. Westerns are the worst because a Western can eat about 5 times as much root as a Northern can. So you got to have more Northerns to do the same level of damage as you can get out of a Western. Western is just a bigger bug. So having a lot of Northerns is not as scary as having a lot of Westerns, but there are potentially some situations out there that people need to be aware of going into next year. And certainly if you've got a field that's just polluted with rootworm beetles and your plan is to go to corn next year in that field, then you need to be thinking about that. Because there's going to be a lot of egg laying going on in that cornfield for sure.
Yeah, great conversation on rootworm beetles. Hopefully that answered your question, Tom, about the alerts that you've been seeing popping up. Gary's got another question on fungicide. So, thoughts on the second trip of fungicide on the later planted corn? If he decides to make another pass on the later planted corn, what do you think about? Do we need to do full rates? What type of fungicide do we need to use or not consider with the second pass on the later planted corn?
So, I think if you're talking about an R3 or R4 stage pass on the late planted corn, you're going to be well into August, before we get to that point. And by that time, Gary, if fields that didn't get sprayed aren't just completely consumed with disease, and if we're not finding tar spot a lot more severely than we are today, I don't know how aggressive I'm going to be making that second application, because that second application is really needed when the house is on fire. The house isn't on fire right now. We can't even find any smoke. But if you fast forward 6 weeks from now, when that late planted corn might be in that R3, R4 stage, if you can find some houses on fire, that's an indication that there's a lot of disease pressure, and that crop needs to finish strong to be the best it can be. And that might help you make that decision. Now, as far as what to use, what rate to use, what product to use, the sinister thing about tar spot is there is no such thing as a cheap fungicide that's good on tar spot. It tends to be the better products that are better. Now there are some, older products. So I'll call out pyraclostrobin, which is the active ingredient in headline. At 6 ounces, which is the standard rate, it does nearly nothing to tar spot. At 12 ounces, which is the full rate, it's not too bad. So sometimes you can take a poorer product and use a high rate of that product and come close to the level of control that you would get from, say, a standard rate of a product that's better. Now, if you compare full rate to full rate, the better product's always going to be better. But if you compare a full rate of the mediocre product to a standard rate of the good product, it might get you close. But if you're making that late application because of tar spot, now southern rust is a little different because southern rust is a different disease. Every fungicide, it's just like herbicides. There's so many analogies between herbicides and fungicides. So we've got 3 primary modes of action of fungicide. So we got our strobies, we got our triazoles, and the SDHIs. So those are the 3 primary modes that we are using. So it's just like a group 15 herbicide. Some group 15 herbicides are really good on water hemp, small seed broadleaf control. Some are not. They're all group 15s, but not all group 15s have the same spectrum. So not all strobies control the same diseases. Not all strobies control the same diseases to the same degree. There are some products where the SDHI component is what's controlling southern rust, but not all SDHIs control southern rust. So every specific fungicide active, just like herbicides, have a different level of control on the different diseases. And so you can't just paint them all with the same brush and say, oh, well, if you want southern rust control, you got to have an SDHI. Well, no, that's not true. Our triazole in Delaro is what's primarily controlling southern rust. We've got an SDHI in Delaro Complete, but you don't need Delaro Complete to control southern rust. There's benefits of having multiple modes of actions of fungicides, just like there is benefits of having multiple modes of actions of herbicides. But you can't just say that, well, this class of herbicide or this class of fungicide controls these diseases, because it depends on the active, and they're all different. The rates are different. 2 ounces of this one has the same amount of efficacy as 6 ounces of that one. So you can't say that because this is 6 ounces and this one's 2 ounces, that 6 ounces is better than 2, because 2 might be better than 6, because they're different products. And so you got to look at the labels. You got to look at what's in there. You got to look at the ratios. There's a lot of games that get played with ratios. I mean, there might be something in this jug, but if there's not enough of it in that jug, it's kind of irrelevant that it's in the jug. But it sounds good when somebody says, "Oh, well, that's in the jug." But if there's not enough in there to have a benefit, then you need to know that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about NCGA and yield chasers. So how does so first question, do you have to be an NCGA to participate in yield chasers?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So the registration is completely different. Of course, all of our retailers within the geography are pretty aware of yield chasers up to this point. We'll be going into our 3rd year of it. One of the best ways that any grower can get involved, if they think that that's something they might want to do, get with their retailer, get with their local FSR, talk with them about that. So no, they definitely don't have to participate in NCGA to be in yield chasers, but they are definitely two different programs that have similar end goals, can provide some of the same recognition and pair well together.
Yeah. So and we definitely do encourage our yield chaser participants to go ahead and do the extra work required with entering NCGA. And we have producers every year that would have placed in the NCGA contest had they entered. There's also some, once you get above 300 bushel, there's some additional rules. You got to have judges and weights and some additional verification to make sure that you're not fibbing. And so you also have to be prepared. If you think there's a good chance you'll be over 300, then you got to have your ducks in a row on that. And we've also had situations where, people wanted to participate in the contest. They were participating in the contest. They got into some corn that was way better than they thought it would have been. They didn't have a judge. They didn't have the verification process. And unfortunately, an entry that would have won was not an entry because it didn't meet the requirements.
Right. No, so it's definitely that, and that's something we've really been working on. I've been working with the team on just, getting them informed, getting them knowledgeable on everything there is to know, like Lance touched on, stuff like that second pass, to where, it's not a ton of extra work. It's just one of those things where you really need to have your ducks in a row. That way, you have the best opportunity possible to get that recognition you deserve and really, really reap the benefits of all the hard work put in throughout the growing season.
Mm-hmm.
So
cool.
Definitely.
So we've had, obviously seed companies for forever and ever and ever have loved that yield contest, because when, typically a little secret for you all, the growers who know how to win the contest would probably win the contest no matter what they were planting. So the companies that those growers are loyal to, we love those guys to death, because whatever corn they're growing, they're going to make it look good. And we've had a lot of really good success the last 2 years, almost embarrassing how well DeKalb has done the last 2 years in NCGA. And so, there's a lot of momentum here within DeKalb, a lot of excitement, a lot of customers are having a lot of success, a lot of fun with it. And it is cool to see the winged ear all over the results of the NCGA yield contest. So appreciate your help, Austin, this summer, getting people to sign up for that, because it is a little more work. We're pretty trusting with yield chasers, quite frankly. We're we're going to assume your combine is kind of half-ass calibrated when it comes to your yield monitor, and we're going to let you draw a 10-acre field region report in a field in climate and make your submission that way if you so choose. You can weigh it also if you want to be, more precise, more accurate. If you're going to weigh a yield chaser entry, you only have to have, what is it, an acre and a quarter?
I believe that's right. Yep.
So we'll let you cherry pick a smaller spot. If you're going to do the climate field view option, need 10 acres, and it's not supposed to look like an amoeba. It needs to be kind of a parallelogram of some kind, of a circle, a square, maybe a rhombus would be okay, or rectangle, but no amoebas. You can't carve your field up into something funky just to try to win the contest. But we've had a lot of fun with that. We'll have a banquet is that in February?
Yep.
Yeah.
The date we've got set for it right now is February the 5th of 2025.
Awesome. Glad you're here, because I wouldn't have been able to tell you what the date was. So February 5th. Sorry, Jennifer. Jennifer is she's our yield chaser queen, and she drives that thing, and I'm very thankful for her passion around that to make that be a success, and a lot of help from Zach Bennis as well on that. So we're already past our hour, so time flies when I have a guest with me. So a little more Murray State stuff. What sports can you participate in at Murray State?
Well, that I can participate in. Probably
well, I'm talking about
I'm
athletes, Austin. So I'm not talking intramural here. So let's talk the real thing. So
we've got our primary Division I sports are basketball, baseball, and football. Of course. Okay. We've within the past couple of years we've moved from the Ohio Valley Conference though into the Missouri Valley Conference. So there's been some growing pains associated with that, but.
Because I think like Bradley's in the Missouri Valley.
Bradley is in the Missouri Valley,
and maybe is Illinois State too? Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So you guys are going to be playing some of the local schools here. So what's the mascot?
The Racers. So we've got
the Racers. Okay.
I get a horse would be more of our mascot, but we throw the shoes up as our little hand sign.
Okay. Cool. So my son went to University of Northwestern Ohio, which is in Lima. They're also the Racers.
Okay.
But that's because they're like into automotive performance kind of stuff. So it's more this kind of racing than a jockey racing. So.
Gotcha.
All right, cool. So anyway, we'll be back again in 2 weeks. Anything else in the chat, Adam?
No,
appreciate all the chat activity today, guys. So that's very helpful. Definitely makes a better program when you're interacting live with us. And we didn't glitch out today, so that's very nice. So somebody, a friend of mine had observed. He said it looked like you were getting really mad last time. I was getting really mad last time because it's frustrating as heck when that happens. So anyway, so thanks to Adam for being here to help with production. Thanks to Austin for joining us here as a guest. Thanks to you all for all your questions. I didn't get up on my herbicide soapbox, so I'll step up there just a little bit right here at the end. Just so you're all aware, there are no label herbicide applications for the rest of this summer. So we all like to make recommendations for on-label herbicide applications. Unless you've got some wheat beans that maybe got planted pretty late. We're off label for everything. So just be aware of that when you're asking your retailer to, hey, while you're doing my fungicide, why don't you kill some water hemp out there? Lots of requests get made. Lots of people do things to try to help customers out. But as a customer, try not to ask anybody to do anything they're not supposed to do. So with that, I will log off. And what's 2 weeks from today, Adam?
25th.
25th. Okay. So July 25th. Will be our next episode, and by then we'll have lots of fungicide sprayed. There'll be lots of bean fields that don't look as clean then as they do today. Just be prepared. So a lot of pretty fields out there. It's coming, man. So anyway, we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. So everybody take care.